like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Dabala. I think she has not joined yet.
Okay.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining this evening.
It looks like Councilmember Dabala just joined.
Okay, great. So we're all here. Perfect.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Looking forward to our meetings in the future. Next week on Wednesday, May 13th, we have our City Council meeting. It begins at 7:30 p.m. We have a public hearing that evening for the 7300 block and the 7600 block of Wildwood Drive regarding traffic calming. Our voting session that evening will be on our first reading ordinance adopting our FY 2021 tax rates. We'll also have the first reading ordinance for our stormwater management budget, and then the first reading ordinance adopting our FY 2021 budget. The work session that evening will be traffic calming requests for the 7300 and 7600 blocks of Wildwood Drive. Then on Wednesday, May 20th, our meeting will begin again at 7:30. Our voting sessions will be the second reading ordinance of our tax rate, the second reading ordinance of the stormwater management budget, and the second reading ordinance of our FY 2021 budget. Tentatively, we have scheduled the first reading ordinance regarding traffic calming on the 7300 block of Wildwood, and tentatively the first reading ordinance regarding the traffic calming on the 7600 block of Wildwood. On Wednesday, May 27th, at the moment, we are scheduled not to meet that night. So we're not meeting the night of Wednesday, May 27th. We will come back again on Wednesday, June 3rd, again at 7:30. And currently we have on our agenda the second reading ordinances regarding traffic calming on the 7300 block and the 7600 block of Wildwood Drive. And then that will take us into June. And so those are our upcoming agenda. Tonight we have one thing on our agenda to discuss. Our city attorney has joined us this evening, and I know there have been many questions regarding the Public Information Act and the time requirement actions. And so we thought we would first just hear for a few moments from our city attorney and then turn to public comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I appreciate the opportunity to address a number of the questions that have been raised regarding this temporary suspension of the response time for the Public Information Act. I think probably the best place to start is just to understand, practically speaking, what occurs when Public Information Act requests come into any particular local government. The request comes in writing. Staff typically is able to gather the information fairly quickly and send it out, whether it's via electronic mail, regular mail, or the individual comes and picks it up. That is the process that occurs pretty much every day throughout most municipalities and local governments in the state. Sometimes, under normal circumstances, a request comes in that requires a significant amount of research by municipal or local government staff for records. And that can span multiple departments and sometimes even requires legal review before those documents can be produced. The important part to remember about that is that in doing this, there are state mandated response times for Public Information Act requests. Generally, it's 30 days, but when you get a large request, the case law and the general procedure, which is recommended under the Attorney General's manual, suggests that the local government should communicate with the requester and say, hey, this is going to take us longer than the required response time. We're going to need an additional 30 days, 60 days, whatever, what have you. That is done. The records are gathered. The process is gone through, reviewed, and the records go out. Sometimes, it's growing increasingly rare, but it still occurs, there are archives that need to be searched. Physical records need to be paper records, because not everything is in electronic format. And people need to go wherever those archives are, go look through those records, or bring them back from the archives and look through them and then return them to the archives. Sometimes this takes multiple people to do. That's under normal circumstances. So fast forward to the pandemic. It's my understanding that the city, even though staff is working remotely, has been responding to the vast majority of PIA requests in due course. However, the city of Tacoma Park, like other municipalities, has found that if it receives a large PIA request under the circumstances of the pandemic, when employees are working at home and remotely, and essential employees are involved in performing essential tasks, it is not always possible to meet the statutorily required timeline. So as the pandemic evolved and everybody's understanding of the length of time that was going to be affecting local governments, the Maryland Municipal Attorneys Association, the Maryland Municipal League, coordinated efforts to work with the governor's office to address an approach to Public Information Act response times, because this is a statewide issue. That coordination was done through the governor's office of legal counsel, which indicated that the governor's office was interpreting the governor's March 12th executive order, as giving local governments the authority to suspend the response time. There was a process that was set out by the governor's office of legal counsel for doing that. There is no set format for how that order, if a local government avails itself of that process, is to be established. So, like a lot of things that are being undertaken during this statewide emergency in the pandemic, we are working through these issues as best as we can. And in the context of the city's specific response to temporarily suspending the PIA response times, the order was issued on April 24th, approximately, about 6 weeks after the governor's executive order, which was done in order to protect the city from the potential consequences of failing to respond to a PIA request which it could not respond to. And I will address those potential consequences. It is permitted under the statute for someone who submits a PIA request, if the deadline for responding is not met, to file suit in the circuit court for, in this case, Montgomery County, seeking various forms of damages to include attorney's fees, as well as a court order ordering the production. Now, that would be potentially problematic given that the courts are closed right now, but as the city attorney, it's my job to protect the city from potential legal liability. And I recommended to the city manager that she execute the order, which was distributed on April 24th, pursuant to the process set out by the governor's office of legal counsel. That is what happened. And the city now has safe harbor under the procedures established throughout the state to protect itself in the event that it is unable to provide a response to the Public Information Act request. Having said that, again, it is my understanding that the city has been responding to everything that it can respond to. And in the event that it does have one request that it is unable or more to respond to, it will be able to avail itself of the legal protection provided by the governor's executive order. And it is my, without getting into the specifics of it, the city does have one such request that it simply cannot respond to because it's so massive at this point.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for that overview. Given the number of questions that we've received by email, I thought it might be helpful to have that overview so that folks who are making public comments, if they had additional questions after hearing from our city attorney, they would have the opportunity to ask those. So thank you for giving that overview. We will now turn to public comments. The first person we have on the list is Sue Miller. Is Miss Miller with us yet?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sue Miller, Ward 3. Good evening. More than a week ago, I submitted 19 questions about how and why our Public Information Act response deadline was suspended without council or public involvement. We are told that the notice was released too early by mistake. Actually, it should have been released earlier before anyone signed it, not later. It should have been discussed with council in public, not signed in darkness. We're also told that this was the idea of the city attorney, who is neither elected nor on staff. If a contractor can erode transparency and accountability without even informing elected officials, then we have a problem. In the midst of a pandemic, is this all just an administrative glitch or a momentary lapse? Regretfully, the incident illustrates what can happen, even inadvertently, when the city manager has the power to act alone. The council granted those emergency powers at the start of the pandemic, in large part because of reasonable concerns that you would not be able to hold meetings. But the council and staff have made a graceful pivot to meeting online, for which we thank you. In the case of the PIA issue, there was no imminent threat to safety, and the proposal could have been discussed at the April 22nd meeting or the week after. So I have 3 specific requests. First, please respond in writing to the questions I submitted so that we will all have clarity on what happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Unfortunately, in our meeting format with no Q&A or conversation, not all questions get answered. Second, please rescind the PIA deadline suspension tonight. We trust our city clerk to respond to any PIA request and to let us know if an extension is needed. As the state makes clear in the manual in tonight's agenda packet, an extension has always been a legal option and does not require a blanket suspension. And third, it is time to revoke the city manager's emergency powers. I urge you to speak to colleagues in Rockville, where council granted such powers but then revoked them. We do not know how long this pandemic will last. As we adjust for the long haul, the urgent arguments for granting those powers without so much as a second reading of the ordinance must now be balanced with the fact that this is a democratic city created by and for the residents. Elected officials must retain oversight powers to prevent any erosion of transparency and accountability during the pandemic. Thank you for listening, and thank you again for scheduling this meeting.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Andrew Strongen. Is Mr. Strongen with? Oh, there he is. Okay, go ahead.
I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for the opportunity to address the council. You may have seen your email and know that I have provided some lengthy legal views with respect to the Public Information Act time limit suspension. I want to provide a little historical context that I did not include in that letter. Our Declaration of Independence literally is founded on abuses of King George, including that he has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. It was 1966 when Congress passed FOIA. President Johnson signed it with a deep sense of pride that the United States is an open society. Its principal sponsor, a Democrat, explained, the present trend toward government secrecy could end in a dictatorship. The more information that is made available, the greater will be the nation's security. Our Supreme Court holds the basic purpose of FOIA is to ensure an informed citizenry, vital to the functioning of a democratic society, needed to check against corruption and to hold the governors accountable to the governed, and defines a structural necessity in a real democracy. According to Maryland's Attorney General, the Public Information Act is based on the enduring principle that public knowledge of government activities is critical to the functioning of a democratic society, that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people must be open to the people. Members of the public need and deserve complete information as they make decisions and form the opinions that determine our future path, and the Act ensures that those needs are met fairly and expeditiously while protecting important privacy rights and other public policy goals. There has been no greater disruption to any of our lives than this COVID-19 outbreak. Still, while exigencies might arise due to these disruptions, that is not a justification for diminishing our civil liberties. Now more than ever, our civil liberties must be preserved. So it was that certain of us in this city decried the mayor and council support for the city manager's emergency ordinance, which I believe to be unlawful, delegating broad power to an unelected city manager, literally to suspend any and all municipal legislation without prior approval of any elected official. Now the city manager has flexed that power, suspending our rights under the Public Information Act. The city manager did that without any showing of emergency or need, and apparently without seeking input, much less approval, from the mayor or the council. Don't worry, we're now told, the city will do its best. And I don't doubt that the city will try to do its best. But if this law is the city's best.
Thank you, Mr. Stronga. Your time is up. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. David Navari. Is Mr. Navari with us yet?
He is here.
Okay. And I know he has a presentation you're going to share, correct?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
David, you here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I didn't know if I was supposed to click. I don't click start my video, I don't think, right?
Yeah, you can.
You can if you want to be on video.
If you want. Yes.
Yep, you're on video.
Okay, David Navari, Ward 3. I'm focusing right now on stormwater fees. So I appreciate Jesse showing the videos, and I'll just tell you next slide. But before I go to this, imagine you have twins, a boy and a girl, and you take from their allowance to buy $10 chocolate cake, and you split it in half, and then you ask the girl to pay $6 and the boy to pay $4. That's how easy this stormwater fee issue is. It's simply proportionally splitting the fee based on the area. Next slide. So based on the old 2020 numbers, the past numbers, we know that they were just a gross average, median using the $92 for the residential. But as you can see from the table, the top bar shows you impervious area and then the total percentage of fees. So based on the bad data we had, at least it was split up equally. Now we know that the smaller houses got penalized, and we know the commercial properties weren't treated appropriately either. Next slide. So the great news is you guys hired a great engineering firm, must have cost in excess of 100K. And we see that the impervious area at the top and the fees that would be used if you bill out at $25 per square feet are almost exactly what you want it to be. They're perfectly proportional. Next slide. So the reason I got engaged in this and spent about 10 hours on this is that when I heard the city manager say that there was $126,000 more in that the commercial and industrial were using, I checked the numbers, and it's just factually incorrect. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the fees, no matter how you do it, there was only about $78,000 more that the commercial companies were paying based on the accurate now data that we have from Black & Veatch. So that number, I don't know if it was just sloppy work or someone misspoke, but it was incorrect. And I've looked at all of Daryl's numbers, and I looked at all of this stuff, and that's what I do for a living, is due diligence. So the thing that bothers me is that none of you council, because you weren't looking at tables, you weren't looking at charts, you weren't looking at graphs, knew this. And I watched this hour and 16-minute meandering conversation. It was almost impossible to follow because, you know, there's a lot of numbers. If you go to the next slide, the good news is the thing you finally voted on, whether you knew it or not, we shorted the fees stormwater account by $105,000. We're using last year's excess, which is fine. And you did split it up almost proportionally.
Mr. Navari, that's your time. Thank you very much. And I know I believe you sent this to the full council, so we'll make sure everyone receives it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next we have Jose La Paz.
I don't see him on.
Jose's not here. Okay, then we'll go to Mr. Roger Schlegel. Is Mr. Schlegel with us?
He is. Just
Okay.
Yes, I am. Hi, Roger Schlegel, Ward 3. This is more of a human relations take rather than a legal take on the emergency powers issue. So throughout this crisis, I've heard people expressing appreciation for their city government, but I've also heard people raising questions that indicate mistrust. And here are some of the questions that I've heard raised. And I'm sharing them not to make insinuations, but only to illustrate how a lack of information generates mistrust. Here's some questions that I've heard other people say. What happens to the proceeds of the sale when equipment is sold? How many contractors does the city employ? And out of what funds are they paid? Is money from equipment sales used to pay contractors? How much of the personnel cost increases are related to step increases, cost of living adjustments, and changes in fringe benefits? Are certain employees outliers in terms of their changes in compensation? How much money have we now paid the architects for the library? Why did they need enough more money to pay 2 architects for a full year at $125 per hour? I've heard people asking, how is the atrium renovation project being paid for? Is it going forward in FY21? Are library bond funds going to be used? What assessments, and then with the crisis, what assessments and criteria are staff using to distribute emergency assistance equitably? Are those with better access more likely to get assistance? And with OTBA involved in microgrant decisions, has any favoritism been shown toward Old Town businesses? I'm sure you've heard some of these questions being raised too. It's unclear whether the City Council has been asking questions such as these, and if so, what the answers might be. Not knowing the Council's degree of oversight, residents can begin to feel they need to ask their own questions. Normally, folks don't want to make formal PIA requests because this seems to invoke a kind of privilege that says my request has to take precedence over others. Still, simply having that option of making a formal PIA request and then getting results quickly gives residents a degree of confidence that staff will respond expeditiously even without a formal PIA request. So when the city manager suddenly and unilaterally suspended PIA requirements, residents who were already mistrustful could easily perceive the action as a way of saying, essentially, we don't have to answer your questions. This compounded residents' level of mistrust and caused more questions to arise, even about issues that predate the PIA suspension, like the library, for example. So especially in a crisis, people want assurance that they can trust what their government is doing. It was reasonable to grant the manager emergency powers to respond to the crisis in its early days, but now with the council having established ways like this to conduct normal business, in order to help restore the normal balance of powers in the council manager form of government and to help rebuild public trust and unity in this time of crisis, I ask that you, as the City Council, revoke the manager's suspension of PIA requirements and rescind the emergency powers granted to the manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jessica Landman.
Good evening. Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you. Hold on one second. Yeah, now we can see you.
Good evening. Jessica Landman, Ward 1. Tonight I'm speaking about the Emergency Powers Ordinance that the city enacted to enable the city manager to take emergency actions that would otherwise be contrary to city code, regulation, policy, contract, or personnel manual if needed during the pandemic. The underlying assumption, which was stated by many at the night of its hasty enactment, was that the city council might not be able to meet, consider the extraordinary circumstances and adopt needed changes to existing code, regulations, or policies that the city manager might deem necessary because of the pandemic and the possibility of changes in the feasibility of meeting. But fortunately, that concern has proven to be unfounded. The city manager and staff have found a way to continue to conduct the city's business virtually, and there is every reason to expect that this will continue for the duration of the pandemic. Therefore, you should do as Rockville has done and rescind, or at a minimum, modify to constrain this emergency power, which has been exercised unnecessarily. The PIA is but one example. Let me explain. The city manager has taken 7 actions listed on the website by her pursuant to these emergency powers. And as I review them, I see that each and every one of those actions could indeed have been brought to the city council. Several relate to the code not allowing for hazard pay. Had this been brought to the council for consideration and amendment of applicable code provisions, it almost certainly would and could have been approved under your emergency powers to act on one reading. But the power to say no on a budget matter belongs to you and should have been exercised by you. One, I think, somewhat camel's nose under the tent action was to approve a garage door purchase that normally would go through council consideration and action because of the price tag. The city manager stated in her rationale that, quote, the time in taking this to council would be a burden on otherwise very busy staff, unquote. That is a slippery slope. Your oversight of city spending and operations is a core function, and this was hardly an emergency that makes the use of emergency powers appropriate. You are able to meet. You are able to vote to amend applicable ordinances and regulations. You should rescind this ordinance, and if you do not want to rescind it, you should at least revise it to narrow its applicability to true emergencies. To read in part, the city manager shall attempt to give effect to both provisions, the uncodified ordinance and any existing code provisions. But in the event that it is not possible, and here's the amendment, and the council is unable to take emergency legislative action to address the conflict, then the emergency ordinance could control. I will provide you with that language. With an amendment like this, or the rescission of this ordinance, you will properly take back the powers of the city's elected officials, and you will properly rebalance the executive and legislative branches' authorities in Tacoma Park. Please take this seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Susan Schreiber.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Susan.
Thank you. The issue of the city manager neglecting to inform, much less discuss, with the mayor and council prior to announcing that the 30-day deadline for responding to public information requests was suspended is concerning. And it led me to go back and listen to the discussion at the March 11th council meeting when the decision was made to approve the city attorney and the city manager's proposal that she assume emergency powers as of that evening. At the time, I spoke during the public comment period, urging the council to deliberate further and delay a decision because as yet there was no announcement of a statewide emergency that would hamper the city government to function. 2 days later, however, it was announced that schools were closing immediately, and several days later, the governor issued additional measures. So I was definitely wrong about that. But as I listened again, much of the city attorney's explanation for the need for the city manager to assume emergency powers had to do with the fact that a statewide emergency might be declared, and if it were, the council would not be able to meet under the rule that meetings needed to be conducted in the public view. But what seemed like a major hurdle then has turned out to be the new normal, just as this meeting tonight of the mayor and council and other city officials is not only taking place, but it is open to the public. The major rationale for granting the city manager emergency powers has disappeared. I really hope that the council will seriously consider rescinding these emergency powers, just as Rockville has, and thereby avoiding the kind of issue that we're dealing with this evening with relation to the Public Information Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Faith Agbana, and my apologies if I mispronounced your last name. Is Faith with us?
She is here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Faith. Yep, we can hear you.
Hi. Thank you. Faith Dates Obana, Ward 5. I came before the council in late January to highlight how the city's workforce development efforts had impacted me positively. At the time, I had just gained my project management certification through collaboration between your housing and community development team, Ms. Cook Gaines and Ms. Wiggins, and Ms. Logan from WorkSource Montgomery. Of course, the next step was to put my new credentials to work. So I'm back today to confirm that, after enhancing my resume with the PMP certification, WorkSource Montgomery has also been working with me and assisting me with my job search. And I began a new job this week. I'm saying all of this to impress upon you that even though you may not be familiar with the results of the Workforce Development Program, and you may not know the beneficiaries of the program, I want to let you know that it works. With and after COVID-19, the need might even be greater because of all of the displacement and changes that are taking place. The good news, I think, is that your current collaboration with the providers of workforce development, that collaboration is working, and I believe that I am proof of it. I want to urge you this evening to continue to support workforce development, but more importantly, to put the needed funding into workforce development, because I believe that it will make a significant difference in the lives of city residents. Thank you.
I was on mute. Thank you very much, Faith, and congratulations on your new job. Thank you for joining us tonight. Next, we have Colleen Cordes.
Colleen Cordes, Ward 1. First, I want to recognize how demanding it must be to manage a city in the midst of the current crisis. My comments here are actually in the spirit of relieving our city manager from an unreasonable level of responsibility that more properly belongs on the shoulders of our elected officials. Did the city manager have time to consult with the council and inform residents before she suspended Public Information Act requirements? It appears she certainly did, since she had time to hear advice from the city attorney, to instruct him to draft the order, to have it reviewed by the governor's office all before she signed it. It's true this issue came up in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic, but it also came in the middle of budget deliberations that, due to the pandemic, posed their own unprecedented challenges. And it came as both the council and residents were struggling to get information about questions that are still unanswered regarding the city manager's proposed FY21 budget. For example, we still don't have the information we need about the breakdown and totals of personnel costs for the current year and what the assumptions are for next year. So the pandemic has underlined how important access to public information is to good policy. The disturbing way this order was suddenly declared as being already in place without the council's knowledge raises the larger question. Is it wise to continue to burden the city manager with the expectation that she should make unilateral decisions that affect us all without first seeking the advice and consent of the council? Please rethink and rescind these emergency powers. It's not fair to anyone, not the city manager, not the council, and certainly not we, the residents. Residents, after all, even in the city council, city manager form of local government, are the ultimate power. Are unilateral decisions about access to public information a big deal? Yes, if you really care about public engagement. To undermine public engagement in our local government is to undercut the very reason for Takoma Park being our own unincorporated community. Consider the warning of Wendell Phillips, American abolitionist and advocate for the rights of Native Americans and women. As he declared in 1852, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Power is ever stealing from the many to the few. Only by continued oversight can the Democrat in office be prevented from hardening into a despot. Only by unintermitted agitation can a people be sufficiently awake to principle not to let liberty be smothered in material prosperity. Takoma Park has a proud history of political agitation. Please rescind these emergency powers and keep our political activism in the hands of the people and not concentrating power on the shoulders of one unelected official who does not even reside in the city she manages, because it does neither her nor anyone else in our community a service. Thank you.
Mayor Stewart, we cannot hear you, but I see Paul Hubner is next on the list.
Thank you. I'm glad you couldn't hear me because I couldn't get my timer to stop buzzing. So it's probably good you couldn't hear me. All right. Next, we have Mr. Hubner. Thank you, Ms. Cordes. Next, Mr. Hubner.
Thanks to Jesse and thanks to Kate. Okay, Paul Hubner, Ward 3. First, I want to again register my outrage regarding the uncodified emergency ordinance that the council approved. I ask that the council revoke it, as Rockville has already done for a similar ordinance. The city manager has abused the power granted by this ordinance by removing the PIA. The emergency ordinance was unnecessary and a violation of the intent of the city charter, if not the statute itself. It has proven to be unnecessary and borders on unethical. The council has demonstrated its availability for decisions that have been made. Neither the council nor the residents were notified or consulted about the removal of the PIA. Secondly, I again want to suggest that the city reduce its expenditures and reduce the residents' property taxes by cutting city staff costs. Presently, we have some 25 or more FTEs who make over $100,000 per year, plus benefits, plus perks, plus bonuses. They have received pay increases of 4.9 to 5% every year during the tenure of this city manager and this mayor, which has coincided with average property tax increases of 4%, in addition to the skyrocketing increases in assessments. Property taxes are driving out longtime residents and further gentrifying the city. Is that the goal? Additionally, department heads routinely request hiring consultants or subcontractors, many with six-figure fees. If the city wants to rely on subcontractors and consultants, should we not see a reduction in the number of staff positions? The city typically spends an additional $150,000 per year on training. What are the outcomes? What are the metrics for these training monies? Soon the council will be asking and passing a 115% salary increase for themselves, delayed only by the current pandemic. Add in budgeted costs of over 100 grand per year for conferences, and again, we have a city of 17,000 spending a significant amount of its property tax revenue on staff costs. The council needs to more directly monitor and review city department expenditures and programs and decide whether all these executive positions are needed, or if the city would be better off running more projects and programs using subcontractors and consultants. I hope my words will serve as an impetus for the council to move expeditiously toward fiscally sustainable model of governance that they espouse. A proposed budget with $6.4 million in the red is not a sustainable model. I thank you, and I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. I bailed at midnight the other night, and you were still there hashing it out. We're not unconscious of all that you do, but I hate to see you arguing over 25 grand for speed bumps where kids are getting hit by cars going 40 miles an hour in a residence when you have people making $200,000 a year and getting another set of perks and benefits. I think that you need to make decisions on where to allocate the resources. And I appreciate all that you do.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. I don't think Julie had joined us.
No, I don't see her at this
And
time.
I don't think Jose has joined us either yet. So then we have Lanier Logan is next.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So I'm Lanier Logan, and I am with WorkSource Montgomery. One of the clients that I've actually worked with, Faith, was on the call earlier to talk about her new job and our relationship with WorkSource Montgomery. Currently, I am the coordinator for the Hire Pop-Up program, which we come to Tacoma Park, and we work with the residents to provide them with one-on-one career coaching services, but most importantly, to connect them with various different employment services throughout the city and Montgomery County. One of the things that has been an ongoing concern even prior to COVID, and especially now, is the heightened need that Tacoma Park needs in terms for a consistent and larger workforce development program. With the services that we're able to provide them, there are so many that need a lot more that we're unable to give them now. Just lack of resources in terms of skill set, training funds. And there's but so much we've been able to do and have some great successes with clients like Faith and connecting them and increasing their salaries and getting them positions with 20% more than what they were making before. But I think the current concern right now is what type of funds are available to access more of the residents in Tacoma Park, and how we would like to continue working with WorkSource Montgomery and Tacoma Park, continue providing them services so that we can reach more people.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We're glad you could join us this evening. Thank you. And thank you for all your work. Something's happening with my computer. Sorry, I'm getting this weird pop-up thing. All right. I think now those are all the public comments we have this evening. Next, we'll go to council comments. Are there any council comments this evening? Okay. Let's see, I have Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. I just have a couple of quick items. I know we were all together for a long time on Monday, so there's not a whole lot more to say. And I know we're going to have our discussion about the PIA requests in a few minutes. I just wanted to briefly let people know that it looks like we are a go for scheduling a meeting in the Pinecrest neighborhood on Tuesday the 12th. And that is going to involve our community development manager for planning, Rosalind Grigsby, and Elza Hintz-McCoy from the county's planning department, who will be able to come and talk a little bit about the planning process and development along New Hampshire Avenue. And we can also talk about many of the other concerns related to traffic calming and trash and some other things that were raised by members in the neighborhood. So we're still working to confirm an exact time, but it will be on the evening of the 12th. I also just wanted to note that I attended virtually a COG TPB autonomous vehicle workshop earlier this week. And it was a really interesting and very approachable discussion, I thought, with a lot of useful information about kind of the future of what we can expect with autonomous vehicles, where the development is right now, as well as some of the things that cities can do to start planning ahead for this. And one of the things they noted, which I thought was relevant to our discussions on the budget on Monday, was that they do need to make sure that there is updated infrastructure, that the streets are in good condition, that the crosswalks are all painted, those sorts of kind of everyday maintenance things, that will actually help tremendously as autonomous vehicles are adopted. So I thought that was a really useful tidbit. And COG is going to continue to have a couple of more autonomous vehicle workshops. They had plans to have a series before the pandemic struck. They were going to have a series of workshops in person, and that's been pushed back a bit, but I think there'll be another one in June, and I'll share information as that comes out for others.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see, next we have Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to thank Faith for her comments on what WorkSource Montgomery has been doing here in the city. Congratulations, Faith. I'm glad that you were able to get a new position. And I do hope my colleagues continue to support with funding the great work that WorkSource is doing with their pop-up. I would ask that the mayor put together a work session and a future agenda item for us to consider the emergency order that was passed last month. I think that we've heard from enough residents so that we should be able to reconsider it. And then finally, I would like to say that the MML board sent a letter to the governor asking for direction on how municipalities are going to be reimbursed through the CARES Act. We have not received real direction from counties that got the money directly from the federal government. So the league is asking the governor to step in and at least try to address the situation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank WorkSource Montgomery for coming out and speaking tonight, and congratulations, Faith. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful example of how community is broader than just aspects of property taxes and property maintenance. It's about making sure that people and the whole circle around their lives, from childcare to work, job security, financial security, are all intact. And when all of those things are intact, we as a community thrive. So definitely look forward to having additional conversations about our workforce development programs and the plethora of other projects, from the mini grant projects programs to our emergency assistance programs, to identify ways in which the city can, get through the current pandemic, but also identify novel ways for us to come up with programs to help residents within our community. Because the stronger we are together, the greater our community will be. So definitely look forward to continuing to have those discussions. I want to remind everyone about the Crossroads Farmers Market that's happening on Wednesdays on Ann Street. There's still lots of great things that are being sold, so I want to encourage everyone to please come out. I want to thank the mayor for putting on the agenda the traffic calming on Wildwood Drive. I know that there's a number of residents that will be excited about the opportunity to speak about some of the challenges that they're experiencing in terms of even during the pandemic, there's still lots of speeding that's happening. Lastly, I want to encourage the community to share any ideas that you all might have on ways in which the city can support our graduating seniors. This is such a hard year for our high school seniors in the city to graduate and not have the traditional things that we typically have when you're graduating from high school in terms of prom and commencement ceremonies. And I see that there are signs in some of the multifamily buildings, but also in a number of yards in different around the community, just to celebrate our Blair graduates. So I'm definitely interested in hearing any ideas that residents may have on ways in which we may be able to come together to celebrate all of our graduating seniors in the city. And so if you have any ideas, please reach out to me, and definitely we can work together to try to figure out something that we can do to support the kids in the community. Thank you.
Great. And thank you so much, Councilwoman Searcy, for raising that, because, and if the city clerk could put on her list, we have to remember, all the graduating seniors in the city, but in particular on our youth council. I just had an opportunity to speak with them on Saturday. And so if I could ask the city clerk to put on the list of the agenda items when we speak about it on Friday, remind us that we have graduating seniors on our council. Thank you so much for that reminder. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. Just one thank you to the folks who have come out to speak. And just one quick announcement, I will have another round of budget related office hour this weekend, Saturday from 10:30 to 11:30. If anybody in Ward 2 would like to speak, I'll be sending out a link later this week. The other question I have is, I guess, for the city manager or perhaps for the workforce person who spoke, if she's still on the line. So if a resident would like to avail themselves of the services, they call the city number, they call HCD. How do they contact the city to connect with these services? Because there's a bunch of folks on board too who would like to do that right now.
We'll make sure some contact information goes out. Certainly they can call the main city number or me or Samira Cook Gaines, and we will make the connection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Siemens.
All right, hello, thank you. Ms. DeBala just asked my question about WorkSource Montgomery, because there are people who are interested in joining that program, especially after hearing not just one, but we've heard several success stories of people getting jobs directly related to the training that they're getting. And they want to know who to call. So the other thing I wanted to say, though, is that I just wanted to second Councilmember Smith's request for a hearing on the emergency powers for the city manager. I think the questions that were put to us today in the public comments justify our looking into it again. Things have changed since that's first started, and I think the discussion will be healthy for us. And then lastly, I would just like to put out a request for volunteers. We will be distributing food packages to help supplement the food for some of the residents here in Tacoma Park on Monday, May 11th. And it would be in the afternoon, start at 1:30. I'm not going to lie to you, it takes a couple hours to do the work, and the volunteers must be able to lift boxes of about 25 to 30 pounds of food. We will be delivering those food packages to the doors of apartments, units, and so people should feel comfortable wearing masks and gloves and being in the buildings. But the way we do it is to put the package outside the person's door, knock on the door, and then leave, so that there is no close contact with other people. Anyone who's interested can call me at 240-793-5108. Again, that will be on Monday, May 11th at 1:30. And it's primarily senior and disabled that will be the recipients. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. One quick announcement. This coming Tuesday, the 12th in the evening, starting at 7 p.m., I'm going to host another Ward 1 community discussion. As in the past, the discussion is not limited to budget matters, but again, I anticipate that may be the primary topic for discussion. I'll be sending out through the normal ways information with the link to participate for those who are interested. So keep your eye out in your email for that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's see. The only thing I have is that I was able to virtually attend an event today hearing speakers from Wider Circle, and Manna Food talk about the need. And I think what we heard tonight from WorkSource Montgomery, I heard a lot today from the folks at Wider Circle. And one of the things that really struck me listening to some of the people who work for Wider Circle talking about the recovery when we get to that, and talking about a recovery for all. And I know we talk a lot about being in this together. And what they talked about, and they defined what it means to be in this all together as learning, engaging, volunteering, investing, and hiring. And that as we move forward, is what we need to be doing together as we go through this pandemic and look at recovery for all at the end of it. And I just wanted to share that with everyone tonight. And I'm thinking about the work we did Monday night on the budget. And I just want to say thank you to my colleagues and in particular to the city staff. We talk about starting the budget with the presentation in April, but the work on the budget is really all year round. And it begins in earnest in the fall, in the late fall, and the staff is working on it all winter long. And really, by the time it gets to us, it has been through so much. And so I just want to, again, extend my thanks, not just to the city manager, but to her entire staff, and especially to our finance department for their work this year and every day for the city. So thank you very much. And I will turn it over now to the city manager.
Thank you very much. We've had, obviously it's been a lively time with the budget, but there's a lot of COVID-19 information that I'd like to share this evening. And I'd like to urge people to go to our COVID-19 webpage because we keep updating it and there's more and more information. There's been a number of topics about reopening. What does that look like? They distinguish reopening from recovery. So recovery is a long ways down the road. Reopening is a slow bit by bit piece, but how the state of Maryland, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, DC, and Virginia all change and do reopening affects Tacoma Park. And so part of our staff's work is to look at how do we accommodate the changes over time. The announcement was made today by the governor that the schools will not open this school year in person. They'll continue to do on this distance learning. That does make a difference to how we do our services as well. So we'll be continuing to watch that. And I will have, now that we've kind of gone over one lump of the budget process, we get to spend, I think, a little bit more focused time on how we accommodate the slow reopening of this region. One of the things that we do have to watch are the metrics. The metrics are not there yet for major reopening. I would like to thank the council for the attention to COVID-19 elements in the FY21 budget reconciliation. I strongly appreciate that. Wanted to let people know there's a number of scams out there. These are very serious. Many of them are targeted to the residents in our apartment buildings. Many of them are targeted to people that don't have good resources. There's one for those folks who are able to get the emergency assistance relief payment that Montgomery County is offering. There's a scam where people are contacting them saying that if they set up a PayPal account with this caller or contactor, that they'll help them get those funds. This is a scam. So please share the information that I have in the city manager's report. It'll go out in the Tacoma Insider. The people who are eligible for the Emergency Assistance Relief Payment, ERP, will receive checks. They do not need to pay for assistance and they do not need to set up a PayPal account. there's other IRS stimulus scams that are out there. So there's a link in my city manager report to IRS scams, stimulus payment scams. One of the things that our staff has been doing that's terrific is making connections. You've heard the WorkSource Montgomery connection, but we have a number of other things that are related specifically to COVID-19. One of them is we'll be helping host a town hall meeting with Civil Justice and the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service on Thursday, May 21st, to give advice to homeowners about mortgage forbearance and foreclosure. So this is, you don't have to be income qualified for this assistance. You'll have an opportunity to talk with foreclosure attorneys about how you can protect yourself and any assistance that you might need. So this is important information. There's also a helpline available that people can take advantage of. We also have had stimulus checks garnished. And so if somebody has had a garnished stimulus fund check, there's a way that you can get those funds back. And there's an attorney, Alexis Bertinelli at Civil Justice, who will be who's available to assist people in removing the garnishment portion and getting their full stimulus check. We also have a partnership with Catholic University's Columbus School of Law, a low-income taxpayer clinic. And so if you have some issues with controversies with the IRS, if you have payment agreements with the IRS and other tax-related issues, we'll have a town hall meeting on May 12th with them that you can get assistance for that. And that also can play into some of the COVID-19 stimulus checks or other issues that are related to the IRS. All of these things are very important. We are going to be trying to get the information out in multiple languages and in different ways. But there are many vulnerable people right now. They need every cent of these checks, and we want to make sure that those checks can be at the full value. Speaking of checks, we are sending out checks on the mini grant program, and we've now been able to help about 31 small businesses from the 100 plus approved applications that we received several weeks ago. We are able to do as many as we have so far. Half of the funds now have come from donations. Thank you, thank you, thank you to people who have either given outright donations or partnered by purchasing the posters or the Indigo plants. These are wonderful partnerships to help provide assistance to our small businesses who really need it. It takes a little bit of time to get the checks out. There's a contract approval process, although we've really worked with the city attorney to have a careful but expedited online process for that. So we have gone through 3 rounds and we're in our 4th round now of getting checks out to these approved small businesses. That's the information I have so far.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to our work session. Again, I just want to thank the city attorney for joining us this evening. Thank members of the public who have come this evening, raised questions. I've noted from my colleague, Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Siemens, there's a request to put this on an agenda. And when I meet with the city staff and we look at agendas moving forward, we will look at the appropriate time to hold that work session. So thank you for raising that. Now I'd just like to open it up if members of the City Council have questions for the city attorney or want to make comments about this issue. Or if the city attorney has anything, now that listening to the questions from members of the public, if there's anything else you'd like to add to your comments from earlier. Okay. I guess okay, so I guess I'll kick it off as my colleagues are thinking about questions. You know, the city manager has talked about before, and the governor spoke to this today about the gradual reopening, slowly entering phase 1, what that looks like, moving to recovery. And I just wanted to know, among municipal attorneys in the state of Maryland, have there been any discussions about the type of emergency order that we put in place? I know other municipalities have done that. Any discussions about those types of things, or how different actions may impact municipalities as we're slowly going towards reopening, I guess?
Mayor, what I would say is, just to provide context, from about mid-March to the end of March, first couple days in April, there was considerable traffic amongst the attorneys who are members of the Maryland Municipal Attorneys Association about how to handle all of these various issues. And it seemed, and there has been almost no traffic on these issues since early April. It seems to me that, most of these initial questions were resolved, and everybody's just very much in a holding pattern. But I have seen nothing on through that group's listserv about, rescinding emergency ordinances, not addressing the PIA issue. And many municipalities are dealing with a host of more complicated issues surrounding spring elections, because a lot of municipalities have spring elections. And the governor issued an executive order that will allow them to adjust the timing of that. So there's a lot of issues out there, but I have not seen any on these issues in several weeks.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I think this would be directed to Mr. Crumbrooks, if he doesn't mind. One thing I was unclear about from your initial comments was, under normal circumstances, if there's a PIA request and it's not responded to within 30 days, and there's no contact or explanation to the requesters that there's going to be a delay for whatever set of reasons, the volume of the responsive records or the amount of searching that has to be done through the archives potentially, is that immediately potentially a violation? Or on the other hand, if before the 30 days are up, if city staff says, well, we got your request, we're working on it, but by the way, it's going to take a lot longer than we might have thought, or the amount of copying is going to be very costly, et cetera. So we're telling you now that we may not do it. Would both of those options normally exist in the non-pandemic period? And would one or both or either of those give the requester the ability to challenge the decision in court?
It's a great question. And as the statute is written, if the response does not come within the deadline, then the requester is authorized to file suit in the circuit court. Now, as I'm sure you all know, courts interpret statutes, and certainly the Attorney General does as well. And the guidance that comes from those opinions is that the local government needs to make a good faith effort to communicate with the requester about challenges and issues that it may be confronted with. And if that is done, generally, the courts just tell everybody to go back and work it out. And that's an oversimplification of it. But it becomes so, and I'll answer it another way as well. One of the things that I do, in addition to directly representing municipalities like Tacoma Park, is we also get involved in a fair amount of litigation with municipalities. And I have been involved in Public Information Act litigation. And what I typically see is a situation in which a municipality has unintentionally made mistakes that have compounded upon other mistakes in responding to a request. And that ends up getting them into a litigation, which really doesn't serve anybody's purpose. And so one of the things that concerns me about this particular situation is that potential for compounded mistakes just by people working remotely and not being centralized, and an ability to keep a streamlined process that they're used to utilizing would present a potential for a compounding of mistakes. So to circle back to answer your question, under normal circumstances, just simply corresponding with the requester and saying, we need more time is not a get out of jail free card, so to speak.
But if there's a reasonable grounds for that, it sounds like you're saying the tendency within the court system here is for, if that can be shown to be that a good faith effort was made, and that for some set of reasons the archives are in some way challenging or some other factors, that in many cases that's, I don't want to say accepted, but seen often by courts as being a legitimate position to take, and then there's an effort made to work out some sort of accommodation. Is that
I would say that is a fair assessment, and I think that again, the Attorney General's manual provides a lot of guidance, although it's not controlling. The courts generally try and allow a municipality who's attempting to follow the guidance that's set forth in that manual leeway in responding. And I think if you move that forward to the context of the present circumstances, you have what amounts to a statewide approach to addressing the suspension of timelines for the Public Information Act request, which, municipalities are free to utilize or not, depending on their circumstances. But certainly the state agencies have been provided that advice and are utilizing that same advice that's issued by the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel. So in terms of providing a defense for a municipality which is confronted with a response that it can't respond to, utilizing the umbrella that the rest of the state is able to utilize presents a good option for a defense. And I would be very surprised if a court were to say utilizing that umbrella was inappropriate, but it theoretically could.
But so it sounds like in some ways then, and then I'll let other people ask questions, if what our intent is now in issuing this notice is to make it clear that it's going to be more difficult in all likelihood than it typically is to fulfill these requests because of what's going on connected to the pandemic. And so what we're really saying, even if it wasn't phrased exactly this way in the notice, is not that we'll never meet the 30-day deadline, but that we're putting potential future and maybe current requesters on notice that it's going to be harder for us to do it. And so if, if we lived in New Orleans and Katrina and all the records have been washed away, we could put out something and say, there's no way we're going to be able to do it. In this case, we're not saying that. What we're saying is for legitimate reasons. Number one, people working from home, it's kind of hard to have access to certain hard copy records, discs, other things of that nature. Number two, even if they're all electronic, if people are home, it may not be that easy to compile them or copy them. And number three, some of the people who might be responsible for it are working more than they might usually on providing services to the community in response to COVID-19. But the notice said that the deadline is hereby suspended, as opposed to what seems to me to be what we're really saying, which is that the notice is still there and we're going to try to meet it, but in some instances we won't be able to. Now, is it legally bad to phrase it that way? And does it make more sense just to say it's hereby suspended? And then when people contact us, tell them, oh, don't worry, we'll probably do yours, but we might not do the next person's. Or is there a reason why it was phrased that way as opposed to what I've just described?
Well, I think Councilmember Kovar, there's potentially room for both, and depending on how we wanted to message that, we probably could have handled it in a number of different ways. But I think from a legal perspective, in order to provide the broadest cover for the city with respect to the statutory deadline, simply saying that the deadline for all requests is suspended provides the broadest possible legal protection for the corporate entity that is the city. It has nothing to do with any one individual or protecting any one individual. It has to do with protecting the city. And some of the consequences are potentially significant under a Public Information Act, especially in a time when the budgets are tight. If for whatever reason a situation were to arise in which a compounding of errors resulted in a non-response in a timely manner and the court were to adjudge it as such, the court could assess attorney's fees against the city in favor of the requester. I have seen Public Information Act requests, attorney fees in the six figures. And so, you know, again, and I can't emphasize enough that these are generally just mistakes that municipalities make. But from a legal perspective, the broader protection is better. I think from a messaging perspective, you know, I could have aided in that, would have been better to explain the context that would have alleviated some of the concerns that we heard expressed here tonight.
Okay, well, I'll stop there for the moment and offer some comments later, but I guess one other thing I would say is that it might be worth considering, if the notice is going to remain in effect, to adjust it to somehow make that clear, unless you think that that would be a real legal problem for us to have it. Because to me, it seems like a big part of the problem, maybe not the only problem, but a big part of the problem is that the description of what we're doing seems broader than what we're actually saying we're going to be doing. So I'll stop there and let others ask questions and then comment again when we circle back around.
The city attorney want to respond to that last point, or?
Well, Mayor, I think that it is possible to capture that type of the suggestion that Councilmember Kovar made in a some type of writing, and I have certainly contemplated and have drafted a potential amended order that would, I believe, address some of those concerns. And I think that its embodiment, it attempts to squarely address those concerns and alleviate them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did the city manager want to say something? Yes.
Hi, there I am. I just wanted to kind of reinforce some of what Councilmember Kovar just mentioned. The intention, first of all, I did not actually go out and identify this as something to do. This was brought to me by the city attorney, given the advice of the Maryland Municipal Attorneys Association, and in talking with the city clerk, who is a person who always looks for being responsive to residents, and her interest in also saying that this was an important step to take. I did follow through and sign. What we did not do well was to communicate that we intended to continue to respond promptly to any question that we could possibly respond to, any request that we could possibly respond to, and we continue to do so. We did put some information out to that effect. It was late, but we did, and we certainly have welcomed and responded to the public information request. So however that gets communicated, and if it needs to be in a revised order, that's up to the council and the city attorney. I'm very supportive of that. And that was the intention all along, as I understood it. It certainly was not my intention to hinder any public information request.
Great, thank you for that. Councilmember Smith?
My question has to do with the breakdown on why the council wasn't notified about this and the rationale of why there wasn't a work session or some type of meeting with the council before this order was signed.
If I can, I think it was just a lot going on at the exact same time, and I was working on a number of different things with budget, with hazard pay discussions with various staff, and it was something that I would have brought to the council as part of our regular conversations that we've been doing on almost a daily basis, and I didn't. It was just too many things at once, and so that's what happened in that particular week, which was a tough week.
And if I may address that as well, the language, I understand that the council should be informed of things like this. But I would say that part of this was a learning process for me in terms of what the council expects to be informed of, when and how. But I would say that the legal analysis of this and the legal pieces that come together in order to get this to the place it needs to go would not require legal approval from the council. The Public Information Act request is, I mean, I suspect this is the most time that this body has spent discussing Public Information Act request issues. By and large, they are an administration of a state law done by staff. And while I certainly understand that suspending a timeline is something that the council can and should be informed of, I don't think that there was any attempt whatsoever to try and obscure that issue from the council. And I would just use this as an opportunity to emphasize the importance of protecting the city from a legal misstep that could arise with responding to a timeline like this. When everybody is working remotely, everything takes longer, and a communication issue like this to the council is emblematic of the types of things that city staffs across the state, across the country now are experiencing as a result of what we're going through. So I would just emphasize that while that was a misstep, it emphasizes the need for putting this protective umbrella over the city.
I'm muted. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion on this. So on the one hand, I very much understand why the PAA action was taken, and I understand the need for legal protection on this and why this is important. I also do understand why there are concerns in the community and how this was presented, as we discussed, and how it looks. You know, I mean, I think this is a community that really values transparency, and it's a community that is supportive of making sure that those in power do not overuse that power. And so I understand where the concern is coming from, and I think it's very valid. So I think I just have a couple of questions in terms of trying to understand where our capacity as a council to get reports on this lie, as well as our capacity to rescind it if we find that it is not being utilized in a proper way. And as I said, I think I understand why there are these sorts of potential for mistakes, potential for missteps. And we've obviously seen that in this case and other cases. I know all of us are struggling during this time, and in our other jobs and in our, the council members, I think also understand, I know I do, that things are just very hard right now. And there are new processes and new hurdles to jump through. Obviously, one of the goals of the PIA requests are also to make sure that there is transparency, and we would obviously hope that there are not mistakes, and that those things are not happening, and that we can have any mistakes that are made be out in the open. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how we can best ensure that happens. Moving out from here, Skip, one of the things that I had mentioned to you previously, and I'd be interested in seeing whether we could adopt it in an amended order if you're going to be working on it, would be some language about the city manager reporting to the council on any outstanding requests that are not where the deadline cannot be met, and then continue to provide an update to us while those are pending, so that we have a kind of an ongoing sense of that. I'm wondering if we could include that in the order. And then I'm also just curious about the council's overall capacity if we find that this is something where there are, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if it were to happen where there are, a number of requests that are piling up and there's concern about that, what is our capacity to rescind an order like this? And what is the process for that?
Well, I think that the process for rescinding an order would be to direct the city manager to rescind the order. And it would be that simple. The way the governor's executive order is structured, that power flows through, and this is where it gets into an issue of how local government, the executive is divided in a local government such as Tacoma Park, but in this context flows through the city manager. So the council could not, it really could not rescind the order itself, but it would have to direct the city manager to do it, who obviously would do it under those circumstances, or otherwise the council could fire the city manager.
So quickly on that, before my other question, in terms of what you were saying previously about the PIA and the council's involvement, were you saying, or am I misunderstanding, that this would typically not come before the council, even aside from the emergency powers, if an action like this were to be taken?
So again, and without getting into a lengthy discussion about how the PIA operates and the structure of the city government, which I'm happy to do because I teach a class on the structure of city government every summer and fall for new government officials. But the Public Information Act requests are an administration of a state law that is done by primarily the city clerk with whatever staff section is required to respond, with consultation by my office. It does not, unless there is some sort of litigation that an elected body needs to be aware of, typically does not rise to the level of the elected body. The city manager under the city code is charged with the day-to-day operation of the city. And that's the charter and the code. The city manager is charged with oversight of the department heads. The city manager is charged with enforcing all laws. The city manager is the appropriate person under the governor's executive order to address this. While I certainly understand the transparency concerns and am obligated as the city attorney to take those into consideration, as well as the other concerns that the city is presented with, this was entirely within the authority of the city manager to do.
If I might address that as well, I did wonder if it was, after, I guess once this was raised as an issue, if it was even an emergency action that was done, but I would have wanted to share that with you. That was the goal, because I try to be transparent. I do also take very seriously the consequences of not doing it, which I would think would be negligence. And I will not be negligent with the resources of the city and of the taxpayer money. And so for that, I did not want to put those at risk. So I think that, you know, when I think about kind of what's a balance about what rises up to a level, I am more protective than not protective. I would have, although I don't think I necessarily was required to, I would have shared that information with you if I was able to do it at the time. It just was a very bad time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And in the spirit of that, my second question was about making sure that we are getting reports and regular reports on things. Is that possible to write into the amended order?
Yes, and I apologize for not answering that. That is certainly something that we can put in there, and we'll work with his city manager to make sure that the timing and all that other it works. And I would expect that, given the commitment to transparency that I've seen in my short time with the city, there will be very little to report other than the one issue that we're dealing with, which is just a logistical impossibility.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks. And also, I wanted to say, agreeing with the need for transparency and to have this conversation. That's why I scheduled this work session. But just to underscore some of the things the city attorney said, I also just want to note that prior to COVID-19 and all this, when PIA requests did come into the city clerk, the city council isn't even really notified of those things. So that is not, we're never really involved unless there is something specific the city clerk needs to get from us or access. So just sort of saying, like, where PIA requests sort of live in our city government, they're generally not things that we get involved with in the past, or even told at any time how many PIA requests we have or on what topics. So that doesn't negate the need to be 100% transparent and to have this conversation. But I do think it's also important to know where this lies in our city government. And I appreciate the city attorney for outlining that. Councilman Dhavala.
Yes, thank you. I had two questions, and one of them you just backed into, which is I'm under the impression that this is not a large volume of requests. Let me start with, my understanding is that PIA records requests and regular questions to city staff are not the same thing, and that there's lots of questions and they get answered. And this is a specific category of requests that involves a lot of research and records and stuff. I gather that from my experience in federal service, where there's the Freedom of Information Act request and there's everything else. So I'm under the impression that the volume of PIA requests that the city gets is not high. And as the mayor just said, the city council has not in the past typically been notified on a regular basis. You know, this month we had 1, this month we had 0. My first question to the city attorney is, in your experience, are there other municipalities that have a system where as part of transparency, emergency order or no emergency order, there's some every quarter or every month, whatever, some statement about how many PIA requests have been processed? And my second question for the city attorney is about other municipalities in our area that may or may not have adopted a similar order in the last, what are we talking about, 6 weeks? With respect to PIA requests, and whether this is similar or completely different from what other communities may have adopted. Thank you.
Certainly. With respect to other municipalities that track how many PIA requests they receive and process, I've never encountered those numbers being published and reported on at a council meeting. It doesn't mean that somebody isn't doing it. I just have never encountered it. With respect to adopting similar type ordinance, or not ordinance, excuse me, but a similar type order, I am aware of multiple. I know Gaithersburg has, I know Bowie has, I know Hyattsville has, obviously. And I can say that I am fairly certain that municipalities that, based on the traffic that I've seen on the listserv for the Maryland Municipal Attorneys Association, municipalities that receive a fair number of PIA requests have taken a similar approach. There are certain municipalities receive quite a few of them. Some very rarely receive them. I would suspect, and I'll defer to the city clerk, but I would suspect that Tacoma Park is probably on the high end of the PIA requests. But you are correct also that there is a significant distinction between requests for records and requests for just generalized information. PIA requests deal strictly with requests for records, documents, emails, things like that. Requests for information, that's a totally different category and deals with the public communication side of any type of governmental operation.
If I may add to that, I know they're all kept track of by the city clerk in Tacoma Park, but I think most of the PIA requests that we get are related to the police department, looking for certain police records and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. There's several residents mentioned Rockville. Mr. Kornbrooks, do you have any information that you could give to us about, not necessarily the second, but that you could give to us about whether Rockville adopted this kind of an order or not? I was a little unclear.
So the only thing that I know about Rockville is what I've heard in the context of this conversation, and perhaps another one with another City of Tacoma Park staff member about Rockville rescinding its emergency ordinance. I can find out whether they adopted a PIA ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Not ordinance, excuse me. I keep saying that. PIA order.
Yeah, while you're asking, you might ask about the emergency order, but I was particularly asking about the PIA. Thank you.
So I will know that I did have a communication with the mayor of Rockville to clarify this, and she was going to send me their notice, but I didn't get it in time for the meeting today. But it's my understanding, and again, I didn't actually see what they put in place, but this was separate from what they rescinded, is that they had adopted the recommendation that they could use more than 30 days to fill a PIA request. So I did not get their actual notice before our meeting tonight, but I did communicate with the mayor there. So,
all right, thank you. And so that's part of the confusion is there's an effort in Rockville on the emergency ordinance, which is
different. Oh, it looks like Councilwoman Costa found it on the website. So
thank you.
That would have been easier too, right? Instead of me emailing Bridget. Thank you. Okay, Councilman Searcy.
All right, I think I've unmuted myself sufficiently with like clicking 5 buttons. Thank you so much, City Attorney. I completely understand fully why we're taking the approach that we're taking. I think it's important to keep in mind that not all PIA requests are the same, and that there are some that are more, that requires more than others. I guess one question I have is for the city manager and maybe the city clerk about the process that we take in terms of notifying residents about when they might anticipate receiving a reply. So does this order, which I agree I stand behind it. I think it alleviates, and kind of protects the city from, litigation around a specific deadline, which allows us some flexibility given the current state that we're in. But do we informally under this order still provide, folks who are requesting information with updates in terms of when that information may come in, an anticipated date of when we may be able to fill it, or is it just a blanket boilerplate response? Sorry, we'll get to it. We'll let you know when we have it.
I think this is a better one to answer by the city clerk, but I do know that anytime we get something in, it's taken care of by the city clerk. She questions staff who might be involved in gathering the information to do the response, to get a sense about how long would it take. I know she's very responsive back and forth with whoever's written in. It's not a bullet. It's not just like some kind of standard email response. Thank you for your submission. It's generally more specific, especially if there's any delay, especially if it looks like it's going to take longer. And I'm not sure if the city clerk is available to respond to that, but that's been my experience, is that we're asked, how long will it take to pull this together? If there's a push to do it, and to communicate that information.
Yeah, I could just say what the city manager said is correct. I mean, however, I would say that there are always times when communication could be better with applicants. But one thing I want to note, just so the council is aware, most of the PIA requests that we get are not from city residents. They're more often, oftentimes they're requests that need to be referred to another agency because they're not really for us. A number that we get are commercial in nature, commercial entities gathering information. That's typical. It is true that typically the police are often it's often police matters that are being requested about. And so there's a variety of things. Communication could always be better, but I do make an attempt to communicate. There's not a boilerplate response that goes out that says we'll get to it when we get to it. I mean, I do make an effort to communicate with people about the status.
Thank you, because I think that also clarifies things a little bit about, another reason why it's important for us to be a little more broad in terms of the order in and of itself versus being a lot, kind of nuancy and weedy given, the full breadth of the different entities that may be requesting information from us. And so I guess one other question is about, currently are most of the requests that we're receiving, I know that we just transitioned to kind of giving folks laptops and things so that they can work remotely. I know I personally sometimes am challenged with accessing the appropriate G drive when working remotely in order to access files. So are there, and again, this might be another question for the city clerk, and I think it's important for people to understand if they're working under the assumption that you all should be able to give us what we need working remotely because everything is electronic. Well, just because everything is electronic doesn't mean that it's accessible remotely. There are some documents that may be locked in certain files that that you may not be able to capture. So, for the city clerk, I mean, can you just talk a little bit about, are there substantial challenges that you're experiencing right now working remotely, trying to just logistically address some of the questions, or have you been able to address those that you are able to address, and there may be some because of either size or access to certain files and things that you're not able to address?
Right, except for the one outstanding request that the city attorney mentioned, really nothing has changed in our process as a result of this or as a result of the pandemic. We have not, in particular, had difficulty responding to requests. I would say the one, if I may, the sending out the notice prematurely, that was, in a way, that was the result of the pandemic, because as you know, my office is right around the corner from Susie's, and that's the kind of thing I'd stick my head in the door and say, well, here, I'm doing this, and we're going to copy this, and you sign this, and I'll do that. And none of that happened. I sent her an email and said, here, this is ready. Would you please sign it and scan it and send it back to me? And she did. And then I posted it. And it was so very unintentional. I mean, it was an intentional posting, but it was just going through a process to get a thing done that really, if I was there, it actually would not have happened that way at all. So again, I have to admit to being the cause of this tempest. So that I blame the pandemic for that. But because it makes a difference being there sometimes and not being there. But I'm pretty much able to handle everything at this point, everything else.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think it's important to kind of, for people to really understand how logistically you lose simple things by not being able to be in a room or next door, or be able to just tap on, poke your head in. So no, I appreciate that. I mean, I just want to reiterate that my thought, and again, it may differ from some of my colleagues, is, I think it's important for us to have the order in place because it provides us with coverage. I think it's important for the city clerk to definitely do what she's doing right now, which is continue to respond to the PIA requests that are coming in and responding to them in a timely manner. And I think, as long as we're able to be and communicate with requesters when their requests for information are large or require access to documents or files or things that we're not able to provide in the, in a typical 30-day or, quicker manner, that we let them know. I agree with some of the points that was raised earlier. I don't know what we would do as a council with just knowing how many are in queue. Because if we don't, other than having a rationale for why they're in queue, the rationale could be you're asking for paper files in the basement, and currently we can't go in the basement to pull the paper files. So I'm struggling to see, necessarily the benefit of kind of knowing that running total of outstanding items. But again, I could be swayed on that. But I do think that it's important for us to make sure that we have the necessary coverage to prevent, any kind of future litigation. So that's my 2 cents on it. But definitely appreciate all of the hard work that the city clerk is doing to try to keep some sense of normalcy to the process while we're working remotely. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And first, I'd like to thank the community members who brought this issue to our attention, and I appreciate their interest in the transparency and their concern when they feel it's been broached. I imagine that some of them may even remember 18, 19 years ago when transparency was an issue this council talked about. We talked about the Open Meetings Act, we talked about the Public Information Act, and many of the way the procedures of how we handle those were refined, and it's been running very smoothly since then. I would have to say that I'm a little disappointed that the city manager didn't let the council know what was happening beforehand, but I accept her apology, and I think with the city clerk's recent admission to this, some of how this all came about, it makes it even more understandable. The city attorney works at the pleasure of the council, and so I would expect that when there's things like this happening, that the city attorney would at least advise the council is happening, although most of what happens, 99% of what happens with information request is outside of the realm of the council. We certainly are interested in transparency, and we do receive monthly reports from the city attorney. Again, I don't know what the timing was on this, but I would think that would be something that would at least be mentioned by the city attorney, so the council is up to date on things like that. But I do agree with Councilmember Kostick that there should be some reporting as part of this kind of relief of the time frame. When we have to do that, I think the council should be advised that there is a request that's been made that we're not going to be able to respond to in a timely fashion. And I'll also point out to the to my colleagues that we do learn about these requests when they're litigated. Sometimes responses are litigated. Anyways, like I say, I appreciate the fact that this came to us. We've certainly learned something, and I think that I'm comfortable with the way it's going. I think we can tweak it a little so that we can stay on top of it, make sure that nothing's slipping by and being forgotten about. But I know Ms. Ludlow for many years now, and know that she fully understands and appreciates the need for the public to know what's going on, even when it's embarrassing or something that didn't go right. And it's I think she realizes at this point that it's much easier to deal with it by being open and honest, even when you've made a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Siemens, I do want to note that the April, and the city attorney and I have had this conversation as well when this was brought to our attention, of how we also better communicate when actions like this are taken, or in general. And as we know, our city attorney just began working with us in January. But looking into the PIA request and working with the city clerk was on the report, the monthly report from the city attorney in April. Now, it did not specify this action, but I do just want to note that working on this issue and looking into it was in the city attorney's April report to council.
So I have to apologize also. Thank you.
Thank you.
I missed it.
So certainly no apology is necessary, and to the extent that it is the expectation that council be informed of this type of thing, I will meet that expectation. And I would also add that the commitment to transparency is something that I am committed to for many different reasons, not the least of which I believe it is the obligation of a local government, to the extent it's able to be, transparent in every sense. And I think that this was simply a mistake that was brought on by the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, I don't want to continue things longer than they need to. Just a few other observations, though, I'd like to make, and thoughts I'd like to express. One, there was a earlier comment that I think the mayor and maybe staff as well, that in the past the council hasn't really been involved in PIA requests, and that's true. And I couldn't say how many there were, or how often they arose. I think there was one where we were asked to see if we had any emails connected to it. But I would say we shouldn't even really be, because honestly, I can imagine a case where a topic could come up and residents would want to see what I or others had said, and human nature being what it is, maybe I wouldn't want some of those things to be seen because I said something about somebody, and that's too bad. If it's in the email, it's part of the record. So I think it's not only the point that we haven't been involved, but really we shouldn't. Individual PIA requests, I do think, though, it's appropriate for the council to be involved when it comes to policies about PIA. And in that case, I think it's relevant here. And so to me, I would say a couple of things. One, a few modifications have been discussed tonight. To me, it would make sense to do those, the reporting piece and the clarification that it doesn't mean that it's completely suspended, but just in some cases, that's what could happen because of COVID. I don't think the reporting should be so detailed. If we do it, though, that we end up being told everything about the request. I'd much prefer just something more like there are 3 requests pending, 2 of them maybe can't be answered within 30 days. And then if we get a periodic update on that, we can see how it's going. Because again, if we're told too much about it and it relates to what we're doing, I think that's not the way the public shouldn't feel like when they make a request that we're going to be told every time about it. And then I think the mayor mentioned, it sounds like the mayor said that we're going to be looking into the broader emergency powers question. There are 2 separate questions there. And I would just say, to me, what among the things that we ought to look into with respect to that are, yes, as several of the residents mentioned, we've been able to meet now, how we're meeting in this fashion as we are tonight. I think that's really great. What we still don't know is that, you know, conceivably before next week's meeting, without really being able to plan for this, some number of members of the city council could suddenly be physically incapacitated. And so I want to make sure we think through, is the fact that we can now do these Zoom or other electronic meetings, is that alone a reason to not have the emergency powers? I don't know the answer to that. And then the second piece of it would be, was this a one-time mistake? I think the 2 staff involved and have indicated that they did make a mistake. Is that just a mistake and that won't happen anymore? Or is this something that's more systemic? And, you know, we can look at those things, and then it's conceivable also, I think we should all be aware of this, that the governor could lift the emergency order as soon as the end of the month, and then things could be moved as a result of that. But I think we ought to look into all those. And then I would just say, I mean, I've enjoyed all of my work with so far, limited though it is, with Mr. Cornbrooks, and he probably got a great education tonight on the kinds of things that the council care about. And so I look forward to working more with him in that way and engaging on some of these things. And, you know, every city's different. We're the way we are. And tonight's probably a good additional introduction to that. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Councilman Kostick?
Just briefly, I just wanted to note that my intention was not to have an onerous amount of reporting on the requests, but simply to have reporting on any that are going to be delayed, and then maybe every 30 days after that we get an update. So we just know that this is something pending, so it doesn't happen that it's 120 days down the line and this is still pending and we aren't aware of that. Because I do think it is important for us to know that if it seems to the council that there's a misuse of the PAA delay, then I think we need to be able to act on that. So that's all I'm, that's my only reason for requesting that. And I'm not placing any blame at all on this, but I do just want to note with regard to the report that we did receive from the city attorney, I completely missed the, I just looked back for it. I completely missed the note about it too. And it was just sort of a one line about working on this order related to PIA requests. And I don't think, I mean, I certainly didn't process what that really meant, that this was for all PIA requests, or this was some sort of blanket thing. So, as I think Councilmember Kovar said, I think this is a good opportunity to just continue to build our relationship with our new city attorney, and for you, Skip, to understand the expectations of the council and the community and sort of where we stand on these transparency issues and things. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this.
Great. So I think this was a good conversation. Moving forward, I think we will, our city attorney is going to look at the notice and has already recommended some adjustments. If there are any other additional adjustments based on the conversation tonight, I will look at our upcoming agenda items and see when we can come back to this very important issue as has been requested. I just want to again thank the city clerk, the city manager, and the city attorney and my colleagues for their hard work on all these issues. As we said when we started working or shifting how we worked, we knew that there were going to be issues that were going to face us that were going to be difficult. I just appreciate the residents who have brought concerns to us, the way that our staff and our city attorney have responded to those. And I very much appreciate the professionalism of everyone in dealing with some of these tough situations. So thank you for everyone's work on this, and we're adjourned. Have a good evening.